Hello everyone. Welcome to video 6 of chapter 2. In this video, we're going to talk about I disagree with the CRA. What can I do about it? So if you have a dispute, so you filed your tax return, the CRA's given you a notice of assessment, and I don't agree with it. The individual can communicate directly with the CRA to resolve a dispute or be represented by an authorized representative. So this is the first step. The CRA will often have in our assessment, like I said, we don't have any record of tuition credits. We've removed them from your tax return. Well, you don't need to immediately going into the formal process of filing an objection. The first step is talk to the CRA, send the document. Here's the slip from Fanshawe saying those tuition credits are there. Please reassess the return. And the CRA will often do so. They'll say, okay, yeah, we see your document. We've reassessed. We've put the credits back on. You're good. So you can communicate directly with the CRA and you can put in your documentation. But let's say they disagree. Like, well, no, here's a slip. And they're like, well, we're not allowing those credits for this reason. And you say, well, I really think you should. Now we can go into a more formal process. And that process is a filing of a notice of objection. So they have a notice of assessment, and now we're objecting to their assessment. So you have 90 days or 3 months from the date on the notice of assessment or the notice of reassessment and NOR. So I filed April 30th, May 15th, they send a notice of assessment, and I go, oh, this assessment's wrong. I have 3 months, June, July, I have August 15th to get my notice of objection in to formally dispute what the assessment's saying. 1 year from filing date, oh, sorry, 1 year from filing due date for year assessed or reassessed. An individual taxpayer can request extension. So I have 90 days from the date of the assessment or 1 year from the filing due date for year assessed. So they assess me on May 15th, just 15 days later. So I have 90 days or 1 year from April 30th. Now, this comes into place that I can object within the first year, but if my notice of reassessment comes after a year has passed, now I'm stuck with that 3 month timeline. But if they've assessed me in just a few weeks later, I have until the next filing year or the next April 30th due date in order to file my objection. So filing a notice of objection for corporations and trusts also do 90 days, but we're not going to focus too much on corporation trusts for the process. So after the notice of objection is received, the CRA is required to reply with one of the following actions. So this will be a formal reply, vacating the assessment, confirming it, or varying the amount of the reassessment. So vacating the assessment being we were wrong, you've provided, like, there's your objection, you've provided some additional information, you're correct, we've vacated the assessment, so we're now going back to what you filed. Confirming it is formally saying, we've seen your objection. No, we think you're applying those credits incorrectly. We stand by our decision to remove them. Or they can vary the amount of the with a reassessment. So you say, well, you've given more information, and that explains some of the deductions you've taken. We've reinstituted them, but not all of them. So we are still leaving off most of what our reassessment claimed. So basically, they can agree with your objection, deny your objection, or just use your objection to modify the reassessment slightly. So yes, no, maybe. Rules for large corporations. Federal government introduced a restriction for certain large corporations when filing a notice of objection must specifically identify and address each issue to be decided. Dollar amount of relief sought for each issue, facts and reasons replied on by corporation. So our notice of objection just says, I think I'm owed the credits. I have a T-slip from Fanshawe, whereas corporations, again, they often have accounting departments who can support and substantiate every number. So there's more onus on them to say, no, no, the government owes us X number of dollars because of certain deductions, et cetera, et cetera. So this level of detail is not required for individuals. So we filed our notice of objection, and the CRA says, no, we're confirming it. We are sticking with our reassessment. Well, now we can upgrade what we want to do. We can appeal to the Tax Court of Canada. This is a specific court for tax disputes. So there is an informal procedure. This is usually for small amounts when tax is less than $25,000 or if the loss is less than $50,000. So if the tax, what's being paid out is less than $25,000, you can go for the informal procedure. Now, $25,000 sounds like a lot of money. And for an individual, it often is. But when you have the CRA processing tax returns for a lot of corporations and wealthy individuals, on the scale of all the tax returns they deal with, $25,000 is on the low end. So for these small amounts, there's an informal procedure where you don't have to get a lawyer or an appeal or a precedent. So these tax amounts are usually with individuals. I'll go to the Tax Court of Canada. I will state my case. Then that tax court, because it's an informal procedure, will probably try to get some sort of compromise or an arrangement that I and the CRA will agree to. The general procedure is represented by individual taxpayer or legal counsel, corporations represented by legal counsel. So if I don't want to do the informal, I actually want to go to court. Well, now we're in a general procedure and I'll probably want to get a lawyer. General procedure is more formal than the informal procedure. So if there's a decision here by the courts, it is a court decision and the CRA is bound by it. The informal procedure, it'll often go back and forth trying to find kind of a compromise. But a general procedure, we want a tax ruling. But what if it doesn't go my way? Or you know what, the CRA might also appeal it. But let's say whoever gets their decision done, whoever wins, the loser decides, no, 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 no. The tax court has made their statement. Now, the tax court's very well versed in the Tax Act, so their decisions will often be held. But if you think no, what they've concluded is incorrect, I want to plead my case to a higher court. Well, now we can go to the Federal Court of Appeal, where we will go to that level of court. We'll have, here's our court, here's my information, here's why I think it's wrong, and the federal court might say no, we side with the Tax Court of Canada, we hold their ruling, or it could overturn. If the Federal Court of Appeal says, no, the tax court had it right, please pay those taxes. And I'm like, no, I don't owe it. They're incorrect. They're wrong. We can go to the Supreme Court of Canada. Now, the Supreme Court of Canada is the highest court in the country. But to go to the Supreme Court, you kind of have to apply. You'll say, here's my dispute. Here's the argument I want to make and some evidence. And the Supreme Court will sort of give a preliminary review to see if that's even a case they take on. The Supreme Court only takes a handful of court cases each year, but it is the highest level of court in the land. So if you give your application and they say, okay, I think he might have an argument here, we'll hear him out. Then I go in and I say, okay, here's the Tax Act, here's the specific lines, here's the interpretation that the tax court and the federal court said is correct. My situation falls within that interpretation. The Supreme Court might say, okay, you win. I think we're going to overturn it. Yeah, the CRA, you don't owe the CRA that money, etc. But if the Supreme Court says, no, absolutely, you owe those taxes, that doesn't apply, now I have nowhere to go. I've already gone through all of the layers of court in Canada. So at first, we can just deal with the CRA. Here's my document. For most of us, this will come to probably a truthful conclusion. I was about to say satisfactory conclusion, but many of us are not satisfied when having to pay money. But here's my information. The CRA said we'll accept it or not. Once we go into filing notice of objection, they say, no, we're confirming the objection. I say, well, I'll go to the tax court. If the tax court comes to a ruling I don't agree with, we'll go to the Federal Court of Appeal and I can go to the Supreme Court of Canada, but very few cases go that high. Okay, so that's our discussion on just disputes and appeals. There is an exercise related to it. Exercise 2-11. Jerry Fall filed his 2025 income tax return as required on April 30th, 2026. His notice of assessment dated May 20th, 2026, so just 20 days later, indicated that his return was accepted as filed. On May 22nd, 2027, so just over a year later, he gets a notice of reassessment dated May 15th, indicating he owes additional income tax as well as interest on unpaid amounts. What is the latest date for filing a notice of what is the latest date for filing a notice of objection for his 2025 reassessment? So even though he received the reassessment on May 22nd, it was dated May 15th. So that is the date that we're concerned with. That is the date of the reassessment. So the filing deadline of an objection is the later of 1 year after the filing due date or 90 days after the notice of assessment. Now, the return was filed April 30th, 2026. So 1 year after the filing date is April 30th, 2027. But we didn't even get the assessment before April 30th, 2027. We got it May 15th. Well, we got it May 22nd, but the date of its assessment is May 15th. So we have 90 days from that date. So May 15th plus 90 days is August 13th, 2027. We'll take the later date. Taxpayer has until August 13th, 2027 to file a notice of objection. That's our discussion on disputes and appeals. When we come back, we'll go into a little more detail on the difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance and planning. Thank you for your time. See you in the next video.